Hi everyone, super excited to be here today to be delivering my presentation on Push, a novel by Sapphire, published 1996. Hello, I'm Tiara Davis. Most of you already know that, or actually all of you. So a little bit about the author. Her actual name is Ramona Lofton, and her pen name is Sapphire. She gained notoriety from the book Push, which later became a film entitled Precious. But before writing the book, she dropped out of high school. She obtained a GED and attended City College in New York. She also worked as a performance artist, which is like slam poetry. A lot of the content that she writes for her book is catered towards her experience as a remedial reading and writing teacher in Harlem. What really captured me about this book is how she captures the element of realness of inner city life, of the tropes and the difficulties of growing up as an African American woman in an impoverished community. And I'll read this book to you. Sapphire's work is truly moving in so many ways. She allows us to put a face to those whose lives are unlike our own. Her hope is that her writing not only offends you, but also moves you into action. Overall, her writing will shake your foundation. It is things that we are aware of, but it's not thrown in your face. And she doesn't, I don't want to say hide behind, but she doesn't use any metaphors or anything like that. A lot of her writing style is very in your face and direct. So it's not sugarcoated because life for the people who live these circumstances is not sugarcoated or easy. Brief summary, again, it's a hard story. It's not the typical it's rough life, turn happy, go luck. It's none of that. It captures that realness. I'll read a little bit about Clarice, who is an illiterate young woman struggling to overcome sexual, mental, and physical abuse at the hands of her caretakers, as well as society. Just society in general kind of overlooks and underappreciates her, and she's almost forgotten. She was sexually abused by her father, which led to two children, one of which who has Down syndrome. She actually calls her firstborn Mongoloid, which is and it's short. The name that she gives him is Mongo, so he is a Mongoloid, and she calls him Mongo. And she also contracted HIV from her father as well. Again, tragic, heavy, difficult. The book is also written in African American vernacular English to capture the essence of the main character's experience, as well as just highlight the way the writer speaks, the way the writer reads, the way the writer thinks, as well as the way the main character writes and how her writing progresses over time. And that was one of the difficulties of reading the book. It's really tricky to understand it because it's written phonetically and not correctly, so to speak. But again, the big part of the book is the author learning how to read and write, and also find a voice for herself. So, author's purpose. The purpose of the book is to highlight the different forms of abuse and challenges teenage African American women face. Living in disadvantaged communities, the author suffered similar abuses as a teenager. So a lot of what the main character goes through, Precious, the author also went through. So she lived in an incestuous home, suffered abuse at the hands of her father. Her mother was an alcoholic. She went through the sexual, mental, physical, mental abuse, the police brutality. It's almost as if it was a memoir that she was writing about herself through someone else's voice. According to an NPR interview, she talks about the experiences of her students and how she used those students to also build the character. So it's like a lot of different student stories and voices captured into one experience. She also places a very strong emphasis on education and how it can shape or change a person's perspective and current lived experience. So we kind of already talked about this a little bit. Oh, this is her perspective, excuse me. So again, the author's background heavily influences the story. A lot of who she is and what she endured. We see a lot of those tropes through the main character, as well as through the characters around her. So as an African American woman, the author is closely connected to the main character story. According to the research I've done, she grew up in a middle-class family, which is different from the main character who grew up in poverty. But again, she's picking up on the work that she did as a remedial reading and writing teacher in Harlem and infuse those stories to create one character. I'm going to try my best not to jump ahead of myself because I get excited and I will say other stuff and I'm just like, oh, that's on the other side. So I'll do better about that. Main points. Depression is a subtle point. It's something that is it's not as overt as the abuse or the education, which is another main point. But it's something that's overlooked. I easily overlooked it and didn't see it until the end of my presentation. I was just like, the people of color in this book, they're all suffering through mental health illnesses, and various mental health illnesses, as well as depressions, which doesn't explain, but it kind of gives you an understanding of why they do the things that they do. So I'll read one quote. I bite my fingernails till they look like disease, pull strips of my skin away, get daddy's razor out, cabinet, cut, arm, wrist, not trying to die, trying to plug myself back in. The interesting thing about it is that I think that the book is not written in a way for you to automatically see the depression, just in the way that people of color's depressions and mental illnesses are kind of overlooked. If you are not a part of that experience, you don't understand the nuances. And what we see through the counseling sessions is that no one is really in tune to Precious and the experiences that she's going through. So no one really sees the depression. No one sees the mental illnesses, just the things that are really overt. Which is also, I think, a message in itself about people of color and their relation to the mental health profession, how they're again deemed as strong, and counselors and teachers, they're just consistently overlooked, which is why their needs are not being met. So sometimes I wish I was dead. Is life a hammer to beat me down? The entire world is beating her down, and it only takes that one person, person to invest in you and to hear what you are saying, what you're not saying. We see that through her teacher. That's how she's able to overcome and work through the depression and the mental illness. I can talk about it a lot, but in the interest of time, I've got to keep going. Abuse is also another main point. So she suffers mental, physical, emotional abuse at the hands of her parents, as well as society really beats her down. And I'll read one quote. How sometimes it's difficult to read because the wording is off or the grammar is off. How that is so, I don't know. How mama and daddy know me 16 years and hate me. How a stranger meet me and love me. So her father has been abusing her since she was 3 years old, sometimes right next to her mother. Once her father left, after her two children, her mother started sexually abusing her as well. I won't go into details about what that looks like because it's very graphic. If you're interested in the book, I encourage you to read it. But again, she is physically abused, and it shapes the way that she looks at herself. She looks at other people, and the distrust that she has. Also, the fight that's built up in her, because so many people are attacking her and coming at her physically, mentally, and so she's kind of built up this fortress around her to sort of protect herself from all of the different kinds of attack that are consistently trying to wear her down. So you're going to stand up there and look down at me like you're a woman. This is her mother saying that to her. You don't know what a real woman do. She throws a glass at her. There's an instance where Precious is running down the stairs with her newborn, trying to get out of the situation. Her mom throws a TV at her. There is another instance where her mom is holding her grandchild, Precious's daughter, and the mom just drops the baby and charges after her. So again, it really highlights the trauma and the abuse that goes on within inner city communities, within impoverished communities, and the different kind of weight that people carry, and how there's really nothing that if we are not in tune to it, we can overlook it. And we sort of pay attention to what is not important. And we see that happen in the classroom, where she is carrying a lot of this weight into the classroom, and school becomes almost like her solace place, a place where she can kind of sit down and think. But because she's bringing all this emotional baggage into the classroom, she hasn't had the space or the time to be able to learn to read and to write and to really think for herself. There's an instance where she says, I've never spoken in class, I've never raised my hand, because no one really invested and built in her. And the author reminds us it's important that we invest in children, our students or learners, no matter what their story is. We have to see more than what their file says, what maybe their IEP says, or what someone else has told us about them, because all the educators, all the counselors that she had before she went to the alternative school, they never saw Precious as a student. They saw her as a problem. They saw her as something that they needed to punish, something that they needed to make an example of. And the education system failed her. She's 16 years old, still in middle school, reading at a second grade level. And it isn't until one person says, hey, you can do it, you can try, that she's able to figure out, okay, I can do this. And it's about, again, being in tune to that person and their potential and what they have to offer, as opposed to kind of counseling them or teaching to them based on our own biases and perspectives, which is what happens in the book. And I think the author really wanted to highlight how that negatively impacts a learner's experience. Counselor, the same exact thing. And I'll skip down to the bottom. The counselors really don't have they don't act in her best interest, which I thought was interesting because we've been reading about it. And it's really interesting to see their bias, their lack of investment, their lack of engagement, and how they want to behave on their own accord. They're not really engaging. So they're not really engaging in her best interest. It's like, I'm doing this because I think this is the best for you, as opposed to I think that you should do this because this is the best for you. They're making the decision for her. And so in one instance, the counselor looks at her and says, "You're pregnant again," not even taking into account the incest that's going on, all the other things that they were not able to get through because they only see the surface level. And then the final counselor, who also says, "I'm going to invite your mother to a counseling session," even though the Precious did not want her mother to come to a counseling session. She wasn't ready. And a lot of times the counselors were jumping ahead of her in the counseling sessions. They weren't with her. It was something that they needed to get through. Again, they were never present in the sessions from what I could see from both the film as well as the book. It was almost as if she was a nuisance. And because of that, Precious had a wall up and wasn't able to really open up in the way that she should have. And what happened was her teacher was able to her teacher became her counselor, and she used the writing piece for Precious to actually counsel herself, which I thought was cool. Another sub point is beauty. It's something that's constantly reiterated. And I want to read this quote. The author says that she encountered girls like Precious while teaching overweight girls who didn't fit into the confines of our society's beauty paradigm, girls who were essentially locked out of the broader culture. So Precious is obese. She's overweight. She's dark-skinned. She's living in poverty. What she does is she values whiteness, white skin, white people, blonde hair. She values thinness. What society values as beauty. Interesting love, though. She shows disdain, and distrust of white people, although she glorifies what it looks like. And I think the author wants to communicate to people with the same lived experience as Precious is, you have a voice, you are present, you are visible, you are important, and you don't need to look a certain way to be deemed beautiful. And I think the film kind of captures that as well. I won't go into that because this is about the book, not the film. Truth to Power. Because I taught in the Bronx, I think that this book has so much truth to power. Everything, not most of what is said, what is shared, I have also experienced it in working with impoverished communities and girls. I don't think that she overshadowed anything. I learned so much about who I was as a teacher and who I want to be as a counselor through going over and reviewing this book. Challenges of the book. So at the end of the book, I was kind of disappointed. I did feel like it became a little bit fairy tale-y. And so it's not like a Disney fairy tale or like a rom-com fairy tale, but I did think that there was a complete upswing. And I was just like, in knowing students who have this experience, it was not the case at all. Sometimes there's not a happy ending. There's not likely that there's going to be all these people supporting you. It's not likely that there's going to be all of these infrastructures in place that are going to help them overcome. And I felt like the ending was a little bit rushed. I wanted to know more about, it's really not a critique. I mean, it's more of a critique than a challenge. I really wanted to know more about the other characters as well. And like what brought them to this. I wanted more. It just didn't give me what I wanted. And I really was not happy with the ending. I just felt like it was rushed and it was too sweet. And I don't think that people who live this circumstance have this sweet, happy ending. Group questions. So because of the experience that Precious has with her teacher acting as her counselor, I wanted to ask, does the teacher have the capacity to counsel her student? Is it his or her responsibility to do so if the student is in need of emotional support? What do you guys think? Let's say that Precious's counselor comes to you for advice about the best way to counsel her. What advice would you give her? Excuse me, that should say or him. What would you refrain from saying? Let me know. Thanks you guys for helping or looking at this presentation.